The wagon wheels groaned against the rutted trail as Mira Elene clutched her meager belongings, 3 yards of calico, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a crumpled advertisement for a seamstress position at a lumber camp north of Timber Hollow. The Missouri dust still clung to her travel dress, but she'd left more than dirt behind in that place. She'd left the remnants of what should have been her wedding day. Nathan Hargrove had taken one look at her when she'd stepped off the train from Philadelphia, where she'd been working as a governess, and his face had gone pale as milk. She'd known then, even before he spoke, that the letters they'd exchanged for 8 months meant nothing against the reality of her standing 5 inches taller than him. "You're not what I expected," he'd said, his Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing cork in rough water. The crowd at the station had begun to gather, whispers spreading like wildfire through dry grass. A wife should look up to her husband, not down upon him. The memory burned fresh as she adjusted her position on the hard wagon bench. The driver, a grizzled man who smelled of tobacco and sweat, hadn't spoken a word since she'd paid her fare with the last of her savings. Just as well. She had no words left for anyone. Timber Hollow appeared through the pines as the sun began its descent, painting the sky the color of old blood. The town was smaller than the advertisement had suggested, a main street of packed dirt, flanked by rough-hewn buildings that leaned against each other like drunken companions. The saloon's tinny piano music drifted on the evening air, mixing with the distant sound of axes biting into wood. The wagon lurched to a stop in front of what passed for a general store. Mira climbed down, her legs stiff from the journey, her height drawing immediate stares from the few people milling about. A woman with a child clinging to her skirts pulled the boy closer, as if Mira's tallness might be contagious. "That's the one came to marry Nathan Hargrove," she heard someone mutter. "News traveled faster than the mail coach out here. Sent her packing the moment he laid eyes on her. Can't blame a man for wanting a proper-sized wife." Mira kept her spine straight, though each word struck like a physical blow. She'd learned long ago that slouching only made her look weak without making her any smaller. The seamstress position at the camp was still available, had to be in a place this remote. She just needed somewhere to spend the night before making the journey north come morning. The town's only boarding house sat at the far end of the street, its painted sign reading Mrs. Clearwater's Rooms, respectable lodgers only. Mira approached the stern-faced woman sweeping the front porch. "I need a room for the night," Mira said, setting down her carpet bag. "Mrs." Clearwater's eyes traveled up and up and up, her mouth pursing tighter with each inch. "We're full up." Mira glanced at the empty rocking chairs on the porch, the dark windows above. "I can pay." "I said we're full." The woman's broom strokes became more aggressive. "Try the saloon. They're used to accommodating all types there." The dismissal was clear. Mira picked up her bag and turned away, her cheeks burning but her head still high. She'd slept in worse places during the war, when she'd helped her father tend to soldiers. At least the weather was mild. As darkness settled over Timber Hollow, Mira found herself at the edge of town, where a small church sat abandoned, its whitewash peeling like diseased skin. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and half the roof had caved in, but the covered porch remained intact. It would do. She spread her traveling cloak on the warped boards and sat down, using her carpet bag as a pillow. Through the broken windows, she could see the first stars emerging. Her mother had always said God made everyone perfect in his image. If that was true, why did the world punish her for the body he'd given her? The tears came then, hot and bitter. Not for Nathan, she realized, now she'd been more in love with the idea of belonging somewhere than with the man himself. The tears were for the girl who'd believed that somewhere in this vast country, there might be a place where she could stand tall without apology. "You planning to sleep there all night?" The voice made her start. A figure stood at the bottom of the porch steps, barely visible in the moonlight. As he moved closer, she could make out broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. He was tall, taller than her by several inches, and his presence filled the space without effort. The boarding house was full, she said, hating how her voice cracked. Mrs. Clearwater's never been full a day in her life. He studied her with eyes that seemed to catch what little light remained. You're the woman from Missouri, the one who came to marry Nathan Hargrove. Mira's jaw tightened. Is there anyone in this town who doesn't know my business? Small towns got big ears. He shifted, and she noticed the gun belt at his hip. Worn, but well-maintained. Name's Bo Calder. I work timber up at the North Camp. Heard they were looking for a seamstress up there. I'll be heading there in the morning. It's a hard day's ride. Harder if you haven't slept. He gestured toward the broken church. This ain't no place for anyone to spend the night. There's coyotes that den up in the cemetery out back. They get bold when they're hungry. I'll manage. He was quiet for a moment. Then, why didn't you get back on that wagon head back east where folks got different ideas about what a woman should be? The question caught her off guard. Because I've got nothing to go back to, and I won't apologize for how God made me. Not anymore. Something shifted in his expression, though she couldn't read it in the darkness. There's a widow named Lila about a half-mile north. She cooks for the lumber crews and keeps a room in her barn for travelers. She won't turn you away. How do you know? Because she's my aunt, and she knows better than to judge a person by their measurements. He turned to go, then paused. You can't sleep here. I'll take you there. Mira stood slowly, pride warring with practicality. I don't need charity. Didn't offer any, just showing you where you can pay for a clean bed. He started walking, not waiting to see if she'd follow. After a moment, she picked up her belongings and fell into step beside him. They walked in silence through the darkness, past the last buildings of town and into the pine-scented night. She noticed he adjusted his pace, so she didn't have to hurry to keep up a small courtesy that meant more than he could know. You knew Nathan, she said finally. It wasn't a question. Everyone knows everyone here. He's a small man in more ways than one. He said I wouldn't know how to bow my head to a husband. Bo stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, she could see his features clearly for the first time. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that held a depth she hadn't expected. Why should you have to bow to anyone? He asked. Seems to me a man who needs his wife to make herself smaller ain't much of a man at all. The words lodged somewhere deep in her chest, in a place that had been hollow for so long she'd forgotten it existed. She'd been told her whole life she took up too much space, stood too tall, reached too high. This stranger, this cowboy with rough hands and an even rougher voice, was the first to suggest that maybe the problem wasn't with her at all. They continued on in silence until a small cabin came into view. Warm light spilling from its windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of baking bread. As they approached, the door flew open and a small, bird-like woman appeared, gray hair twisted into a severe bun. Beauregard Calder. What are you doing dragging some poor soul through the darkness? She squinted at Mira. Then her face softened. Lord have mercy. You must be the girl from Missouri. Come in, come in. You look dead on your feet. Aunt Lila, this is Miss Elena. She needs a room for the night. Of course she does. Clearwater turned her away. Didn't she? That woman's got a heart like a clenched fist. Lila ushered Mira inside, clucking like a mother hen. You'll stay as long as you need. The barn room's clean and private, and there's a bolt on the door. Mira fumbled for her purse. I can pay. Tomorrow's soon enough for that. Tonight, you need hot food and a proper bed. Lila turned to her nephew. You staying for supper? Can't. Gotta get back to camp. He touched the brim of his hat to Mira. Ma'am? He was gone before she could thank him, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as he'd appeared. Mira stood in the doorway, watching the night swallow him whole, wondering why a stranger's simple question, why should you have to bow to anyone, felt like the first true thing anyone had said to her in years. The barn room was more comfortable than Mira had dared hope. Clean straw tick mattress, a washstand with fresh water, and a small window that let in the morning light. She'd slept deeply for the first time in weeks, without the weight of failed expectations pressing on her chest. Lila had breakfast waiting when Mira emerged, flapjacks, bacon, and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. The older woman bustled about the kitchen, filling a cloth sack with provisions. "For your journey to the camp," Lila explained. "It's rough country between here and there. You know how to ride." "A little." Mira had learned on her father's old mare back in Pennsylvania, before the war changed everything. Bo left word at the livery. "They'll have a gentle mount ready for you." Lila paused in her packing. "That nephew of mine doesn't usually trouble himself with townfolk's business. You must have made an impression." Mira concentrated on her coffee. "He was kind to a stranger, nothing more. Kindness from Bo Calder is rarer than rain in August. The war left him different, quieter. He keeps to the trees and the work now." Lila studied her with sharp eyes. "The camp's a rough place. 100 men, maybe more, all starved for the sight of a woman. You sure about this?" "I need the work. Work's one thing. Keeping yourself safe is another." Lila reached into a drawer and pulled out a small pistol. "This was my husband's. You know how to use it." "My father taught me." "Good. Keep it close but hidden. Most of the men are decent enough, but whiskey and loneliness can turn a saint into a sinner." The ride to the lumber camp took most of the day. The borrowed mare was steady and sure-footed on the narrow trail that wound up into the mountains. Pine and fir pressed close on either side, their shadows deep and cool. Mira had never seen trees so tall they seemed to pierce the very sky. She smelled the camp before she saw it: wood smoke, pine sap, and the distinctive odor of many men living in close quarters. Then the trees opened into a vast clearing where stumps dotted the ground like broken teeth. Buildings sprawled in no particular order: bunkhouses, cook shack, company store, and the mill itself with its great saw singing through timber. Men stopped their work to stare as she rode in. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone whistled low and appreciative until a sharp voice barked, "Back to work, you lazy devils." The foreman's office sat at the edge of the clearing, slightly apart from the other buildings. Mira dismounted and tied the mare to the hitching post, aware of the eyes following her every movement. She knocked firmly on the door. "Come." The foreman was a compact man with steel-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. He looked up from his ledgers, took in her height with one sweeping glance, and grunted. "You the seamstress from the advertisement?" "Yes, sir, Mira Elene. Says here you got experience with heavy canvas and leather work." "I worked in a tent factory during the war. After that, I repaired harnesses and saddles." He made a note. "Pays $20 a month plus board. You'll bunk with Cookie in the kitchen building. There's a small room off the back. You'll mend what needs mending, make new when required. Some of the married men down valley might want shirts and such made for their wives. That's your own business, long as the camp work comes first." "I understand." "One more thing." He set down his pen and fixed her with a hard stare. "You're the only woman in 50 miles. Some of these men haven't seen their families in months. There'll be talk, there'll be looks, there might be more. You handle your own problems unless blood's drawn. Then you come to me. Clear." "Crystal clear, Mr. Hutchins. And I run a tight camp. Anyone gives you real trouble, they'll answer to me. But I won't nursemaid hurt feelings or bruised sensibilities. You wanted this job, you got it. Make it work or move on." She found Cookie a stringy man with wild gray hair in the kitchen, wrestling with a massive pot of stew. He barely glanced up when she introduced herself. "Room's through there," he grunted, jerking his head toward a narrow door. "Don't touch my knives, don't move my pans, and we'll get along fine. Supper's at 6 sharp. You miss it, you go hungry." The room was tiny but private, with a narrow bed, a trunk for storage, and hooks on the wall for clothing. Mira set her few possessions in order and reported to the mending shed, a long, low building filled with piles of torn shirts, ripped pants, and damaged gear. She was threading her third needle when a shadow fell across the doorway. Bo Calder stood there, hat in hand, a long tear in his coat sleeve. "Heard you made it," he said simply. "Did you expect otherwise?" "No." He entered and laid the coat on her work table. "Got caught on a branch bringing logs down the mountain. Can you fix it?" She examined the damage, a clean tear that would be easy to mend if she had the right thread. "I'll need to match the color. This is good wool." "It was my father's." He settled into a chair that creaked under his weight. "One of the few things I kept after the war." She selected a thread that was close enough and began working, aware of him watching her hands. The silence stretched but didn't feel uncomfortable. Through the window, she could hear the rhythmic sound of axes and the occasional shout of warning as a tree fell. "Why did you really help me last night?" she asked finally. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You remember what you said about not apologizing for how God made you?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I came back from the war different, not outside inside. Folks wanted me to pretend I was the same boy who left. Wanted me to court their daughters and tell stories about glory and honor." His jaw tightened. "There wasn't any glory. Just mud and blood and boys crying for their mothers. I couldn't pretend, so I came here. The trees don't ask you to be anything but what you are." "And you thought I'd understand that?" Figured anyone who'd travel half the country to marry a man she'd never met was either running from something or running to something. Either way, you deserved better than a church porch and coyotes for company. She tied off the thread and examined her work. The repair was nearly invisible. "There, good as new." He stood and shrugged into the coat, testing the sleeve. "Fine work. What do I owe you?" "Nothing. You paid it forward last night." He studied her for a moment, and she was struck again by the depth in his eyes, like looking into still water that ran deeper than expected. "The men'll test you," he said quietly. "Some with words, some with actions. Don't let them see fear. Most are decent enough when sober, but Saturday nights get rough. Stay in your room after dark, especially Saturdays." "I can take care of myself." "I know you can. Wouldn't have told Aunt Lila about you otherwise." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You asked why a woman should have to make herself smaller. Let me ask you something. How small would you have to make yourself before the world stopped noticing, before you disappeared entirely?" She set down her needle, the question hitting her like a physical blow. "I don't know." "Then stop trying. Take up your space. Stand your ground. Let them adjust to you for once." He was gone before she could respond, leaving only the lingering scent of pine sap and leather. Mira sat in the fading afternoon light, his words echoing in her mind. She'd spent her entire life trying to fold herself into acceptable shapes, hunching her shoulders, wearing flat shoes, even considering corsets that claimed to compress the spine. A commotion outside broke her reverie. 2 men had entered the shed, both reeking of pine tar and sweat. Well, the new seamstress." The speaker was broad and bearded, with mean little eyes. "Bigger than advertised, ain't she? Tom." His companion, younger and clearly uncomfortable, mumbled agreement. "Got some shirts need mending," the bearded man continued, dumping a filthy bundle on her clean work table. "Course, might need to take your measurements first. Make sure you're qualified for the job." Mira stood slowly, unfolding to her full height. The younger man stepped back, but the bearded one held his ground, though she saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. "My qualifications were settled with Mr. Hutchins," she said evenly. "Your shirts will be ready Thursday. That'll be 50 cents, paid in advance. 50 cents highway robbery for needlework. Then mend them yourself." She pushed the bundle back toward him. "I'm sure your delicate stitching will be the envy of the camp." Someone snorted with laughter from the doorway. Several men had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. The bearded man's face flushed red. "You got a smart mouth for someone in your position. And you smell like you haven't seen soap since Christmas. We all have our failings." She kept her voice pleasant, almost conversational. 50 cents, or learn to sew. Your choice." The watching men erupted in laughter. Someone slapped the bearded man on the back. "She got you there, Harvey." Harvey's face darkened further, but he dug into his pocket and slammed 2 quarters on the table. "Thursday," he growled, then stalked out. The crowd dispersed, still chuckling. The young man Tom lingered a moment. "That was brave," he said quietly. "But Harvey holds grudges. Watch yourself." "Thank you for the warning." He hurried after his friend, leaving Mira alone with the pile of reeking shirts. She examined them with distaste. They'd need washing before she could even think about mending. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Mira realized something had shifted. She'd stood her ground without apologizing, without shrinking. The men had seen her refuse to be diminished, and while it might earn her enemies, it had also earned something else, a grudging respect. She thought of Beau's question. How small would she have to make herself before she disappeared entirely? Looking at her reflection in the window glass, tall, strong, taking up space in this rough world of men and machines, she knew the answer. She'd rather stand tall and alone than disappear trying to fit someone else's idea of what she should be. The world could adjust to her for once. The week settled into a rhythm. Dawn came with cookies clanging pots and the smell of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By the time the sun cleared the treetops, Mira was at her workbench, needle flying through fabric while the camp stirred to life around her. The men had grown accustomed to her presence, though she still drew stares and whispers. It was a Saturday morning when everything shifted. Mira had ventured into Timber Hollow for supplies, her monthly wages heavy in her pocket. The general store was crowded with camp wives come to town for market day. Conversation stuttered to a halt when she entered. "That's her," someone whispered. "The giantess from the lumber camp." Living with all those men, no decent woman would. Mira kept her eyes forward, selecting thread and needles with careful deliberation. Her height made her visible above the shelves, a lighthouse among rowboats. She could feel their judgment like pins pricking her skin. At the fabric counter, Mrs. Clearwater held court with several other women, their heads bent together like conspirators. They fell silent as Mira approached. "I need 2 yards of the brown wool," Mira said evenly. Mrs. Clearwater's lip curled. "We don't serve your kind here." "My kind. Loose women, camp followers." She savored each word like spoiled fruit. "We run a respectable establishment." The store had gone cemetery quiet. Mira felt the familiar burn of humiliation, the urge to shrink, to apologize for existing. Then she remembered Beau's words. "Take up your space. Stand your ground." She straightened to her full height, looking down at Mrs. Clearwater with a steady gaze. "You mean the kind who work honest labor for honest pay, who mend the clothes that keep your husband's lumber business running? That kind. The kind who lives unmarried among 100 men, flaunting herself." "I flaunt nothing but my skill with a needle." Mira's voice carried clear across the store. "Though I understand your confusion. When you're accustomed to looking down on others, it must be disturbing to have to look up for once." Someone gasped. Mrs. Clearwater's face mottled red and white like a poorly mixed pudding. "How dare you?" "I dare because I've done nothing wrong except be taller than you'd like." Mira pulled out her money. "Now, will you sell me the fabric? Or shall I take my business to Millerville? I'm sure they'd appreciate the lumber camp's trade." The threat hung in the air. The lumber camp spent considerable money in Timber Hollow. If word got back that the stores were refusing service, Mrs. Clearwater snatched the money and cut the fabric with vicious swipes of her shears. "Take it and get out." Mira gathered her purchases calmly, though her hands trembled. As she reached the door, a small voice piped up. "I think you're beautiful." A girl of maybe 10 stood by the penny candy. staring up at Mira with open admiration. Like the queens in my picture book, they're always tall and beautiful. Her mother yanked her back, hissing admonishments, but Mira smiled at the child. "Thank you, sweetheart. You remember that queens stand tall, no matter what anyone says." She left the store with her head high, but the encounter left her shaken. Back at the camp, she retreated to her workroom, trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of her craft, but her hands wouldn't steady, and she pricked her finger twice, spotting blood on a white shirt. "Heard you caused a stir in town." She looked up to find Bo in the doorway, his expression unreadable. News traveled fast in these mountains. "Mrs. Clearwater and I had a difference of opinion. About your height, about my morals. Apparently, living here makes me a loose woman." She laughed bitterly. "If they only knew. 27 years old, and I've been kissed exactly once, by Nathan Hargrove when he proposed by letter. Even that was just words on a page." Bo entered the room, his presence filling the small space. Townfolk got small minds to go with their small lives. They need someone to judge so they feel better about their own shortcomings. It shouldn't matter what they think. But it does, he said it simply, without judgment. We're not made to stand alone, much as we might try. Even trees grow better in forests than by themselves. She set down her sewing, frustrated by her shaking hands. Sometimes I think it would be easier to just bend, to hunch my shoulders and hide, to be what they expect. Would it? He moved closer, and she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes, a rare sensation. You tried that with Nathan. How did it work? He rejected me anyway. Because the problem was never your height. It was his weakness. Bo picked up a piece of fabric, running it through his fingers. You know what I see when I look at you? Her breath caught. What? Strength. Not just physical, though you've got that too. The kind of strength that travels across the country on a promise, that faces down a store full of gossips, that stands tall when the whole world's trying to cut you down to size. He set down the fabric, his hand brushing hers. That's beautiful in ways those town hens will never understand. The air between them shifted, charged with something unnamed. Mira felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. Bo, there's a dance next Saturday, down in the valley, at the Grange Hall. Some of the married men will bring their wives. He cleared his throat. Would you come with me? The invitation hung between them like morning mist. Mira thought of the stares, the whispers, the judgment that would follow them like shadows. They'll talk, she said softly. Let them. I'm tired of living by their rules. Aren't you? She thought of all the time she'd made herself smaller, quieter, less. All the opportunities missed because she didn't want to stand out. All the life unlived in the name of propriety. Yes, she said. I'll come. His smile transformed his weathered face. And for a moment she glimpsed the young man he must have been before the war carved lines of sorrow around his eyes. After he left, Mira sat in the gathering dusk, her sewing forgotten. She'd crossed some invisible line, not of propriety, as the town biddies would have it, but of possibility. For the first time since Nathan's rejection, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival. The week passed in a blur of preparations. Word of the dance and her plans to attend with Bo spread through the camp like wildfire. Some men offered crude congratulations that she silenced with icy stares. Others, like young Tom, seemed genuinely pleased. It's good to see Bo coming out of his shell, Tom said while she mended his jacket. He's been alone too long. We all have, I suppose, but it sits heavier on some than others. Lila arrived Friday afternoon with a wrapped package. Can't have you going to the dance in work clothes, she announced, bustling into the sewing room. This was mine when I was younger and taller. Should fit with some alterations. The dress was deep blue wool, simple but well made, with touches of lace at the collar and cuffs. It had been stored in lavender and cedar, the scent rising as Mira shook out the folds. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's practical, Lila corrected, but her eyes were soft. Beau's father courted me in this dress, back when the world was younger. Seemed fitting it should get another chance at a love story. We're not. Aren't you? Lila's knowing look stopped her protests. Child, I've seen how my nephew looks at you. More importantly, I've seen how he looks at himself when you're around. Straighter, stronger, like he remembers who he was before the war tried to break him. They spent the evening altering the dress, taking in the waist and letting out the hem. As they worked, Lila shared stories of the old days, when Timber Hollow was just a trading post and the trees seemed to go on forever. People said I was too old for Beau's father, 5 years his senior and already considered a spinster. Said he was too wild, too young, too everything. She smiled at the memory. We had 40 good years together, proved them all wrong. Saturday dawned clear and cold. Mira tried to work but gave up after sewing the same seam 3 times. Cookie, gruff as always, surprised her by heating water for a proper bath. Can't have you representing the camp looking like a ragamuffin, he muttered, avoiding her eyes. As evening approached, she stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. The blue dress fit perfectly, emphasizing her height rather than hiding it. She'd pinned her hair up, revealing the long line of her neck. For the first time in memory, she looked regal, like the queen the little girl had imagined. A knock at the door made her heart race. Beau stood in the doorway, transformed. He'd trimmed his beard, and his usually rough clothes had been replaced with a clean white shirt and dark pants. He stared at her for a long moment, seemingly struck speechless. You're beautiful, he said finally, simply, as if stating an obvious fact. So are you, she replied without thinking, then blushed at her boldness. But he smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. Shall we scandalize the valley? She took his offered arm, aware of how well they matched her height, complementing his rather than diminishing it. As they walked toward the wagon he'd borrowed, she caught sight of men peering from bunkhouse windows. Some whistled approval. Harvey spat in the dirt, his expression sour. Ready? Beau asked as he helped her onto the wagon seat. Mira thought of all the time she'd hidden, shrunk, apologized for her existence. Then she thought of the little girl in the store, looking up at her with wonder. Queens stand tall, no matter what anyone says. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. The wagon rolled into the gathering darkness, carrying them toward music and dancing and the inevitable whispers. But for the first time in her life, Mira didn't care what waited. She was done making herself smaller. Tonight, she would take up all the space she needed, and the world would simply have to adjust. The stars emerged one by one above the pine trees, and Beau began to whistle a sweet, old tune her father used to play. Mira found herself humming along, her voice joining his in the cold mountain air. Together, they made their own kind of music, tall and unashamed beneath the vast western sky. The old coat lay across Mira's work table like a wounded soldier. Beau stood in the doorway of her sewing room, afternoon light catching the silver threads in his dark hair. 3 weeks had passed since the dance, and he'd become a regular visitor, always with something that needed mending. Bear got hold of it, he explained, gesturing to the ragged tears across the back. Surprised him rooting through the supply shed. Lucky he was more interested in the salt pork than in me. Mira examined the damage, running her fingers along the worn wool. The coat told stories in every carefully mended spot, a bullet hole near the shoulder, patched with different fabric, burn marks along one sleeve, years of repairs by different hands, each trying to preserve something precious. This was your father's, she already knew, but wanted to hear him speak of it. Wore it through the war, every campaign from Bull Run to Appomattox. Beau settled into what had become his chair, the one by the window where afternoon light pooled like honey. He came home different, quieter, This coat was the only thing he'd talk about sometimes, where each tear came from, each stain. She selected her needles carefully, matching thread to the aged fabric. The room filled with comfortable silence, broken only by the distant ring of axes and the whisper of thread through wool. Through the window, she could see Cookie hauling water from the well, his perpetual scowl in place. "My father was a doctor," she said, surprising herself. She rarely spoke of the past. "During the war, I helped him tend the wounded. Union, Confederate, he didn't care. Pain knows no uniform," he'd say. "Is that where you learned your steadiness? Your hands never shake, even when Harvey's crew tries to intimidate you?" She smiled slightly. "Holding a man's artery closed while father dug out shrapnel tends to cure one of nervous hands. Yet you came out here to marry a stranger. Father died 2 years ago. Consumption. The house went to pay debts, and there's not much call for tall spinster nurses in Philadelphia." She kept her eyes on her work. Nathan's advertisement seemed like Providence, a new start where no one knew me as that towering LNA girl. And instead you became that towering seamstress who faced down the entire general store. An improvement, I suppose. Bo leaned forward, his expression intent. "You said something once that your first night would belong to the man who defended you." Her needle stilled. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. She'd spoken them in anger and hurt that first night in Timber Hollow, when the world seemed set against her. "I was angry, foolish." "Were you?" She looked up then, meeting his steady gaze. "What are you asking, Bo?" "I'm asking why you think you need defending. From where I sit, you're the strongest person in this camp. You face down bullies, stitch wounds Cookie won't admit to, and stand tall when lesser folks would crumble." He paused, choosing his words with care. "Maybe what you need isn't someone to defend you, but someone to stand beside you." The needle trembled in her fingers the first time her hands had been unsteady since those terrible days after Nathan's rejection. "And you think you're that someone?" "I think I'd like to try." He stood, crossing to her workbench, even sitting. She didn't have to crane her neck much to look at him. "But not because you promised anything to anyone, not because you think you owe a debt for kindness. Only if you want it too." She set down the coat, her repair half finished. "I don't know how to want things for myself anymore. I've spent so long trying to fit into spaces too small for me." "Then maybe it's time to stop fitting and start building." He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers. "Build something that fits you." The touch sent warmth spiraling up her arm. She thought of all the reasons this was impossible, the gossip, the judgment, the fact that she barely knew him beyond these afternoon conversations and shared silences. "They already call me terrible things in town," she said softly. "Let them. Their words are wind. It could make things difficult for you, with your work, with Mira." He said her name like a prayer. "I've been dead inside since the war ended, going through motions, cutting trees, existing but not living. Then you arrived, refusing to shrink yourself, and something in me woke up. Don't ask me to go back to sleep." She turned her hand beneath his, palm to palm, marveling at how her long fingers matched his. "I don't know how to be with someone. Nathan and I only exchanged letters, and even those were more about plans than feelings." "Neither do I. Martha died while I was at war fever, took her before we'd been married a year. That was 13 years ago." His thumb traced circles on her wrist. "We can learn together, if you're willing." The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, turning dust motes into tiny stars. From somewhere in the camp, someone was playing a harmonica, the lonely sound drifting on the breeze. Mira thought of all the afternoons they'd spent like this, building something unnamed through shared stories and companionable quiet. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of me. Of hoping. Of believing someone could actually want me as I am, not as they wish I were." Bo lifted her hand, studying it with the same focus she gave to delicate stitch work. "These hands have healed people. created beauty from scraps, refused to yield when the world pushed against them. He looked up, his eyes dark with emotion. How could anyone wish them to be different? A tear escaped before she could stop it. He reached up, catching it with gentle fingers. Don't cry for the fools who couldn't see you, Mira. Save your tears for things that matter. And what matters? This moment, this choice, this chance we have to be brave together. She stood then, unfolding to her full height. He stepped back just enough to look up at her, and the wonder in his expression made her heart clench. How many men had made her feel too much? Too tall, too strong, too present. But Bo looked at her like she was exactly right, exactly enough. I don't want to give my first night to anyone, she said firmly. That's not a prize to be won or a debt to be paid. If when I choose to be with someone, it will be because I want to, not because I owe them anything. Good, he said simply. That's as it should be. But I would like, she faltered, then found her courage. I would like to know what it's like to be courted, really courted, not through letters or arrangements, but face to face, honestly. His smile bloomed slowly, transforming his weathered features. I'd like that too. Even knowing the whole town will gossip that they'll say you've taken up with the camp woman. Especially then, let them see what they're missing a woman worth standing tall for. She picked up his father's coat, her hands steady again. Then sit back down, Bo called her, and let me finish this mending. We can't have you courting me in a coat full of holes. What would people say? He laughed rich and full, the sound filling the small room like music. They'd say I was the luckiest fool in the territory. As she worked, he told her about his plans for spring a cabin he wanted to build on his claim up the mountain. With windows facing east to catch the sunrise, his words painted pictures a garden plot, a well, rooms built tall enough that no one would have to stoop. You're planning rooms for someone tall, she teased, though her heart raced at the implication. I'm planning rooms for living in, not just existing. He caught her eye. Sometimes a man has to build his hope, board by board. She tied off the final stitch as twilight painted the mountains purple. The coat was whole again. Its story continued rather than ended. As she handed it back, their fingers brushed, lingered, held. Thank you, he said, and she knew he meant for more than the mending. Bo, she called as he reached the door. He turned, silhouetted against the dying light. When you stand beside me, don't stand behind or in front. Stand equal. Can you do that? I wouldn't stand anywhere else. After he left, Mira sat in the gathering darkness, her heart full of something she'd thought lost forever possibility. She thought of Martha, dying young and loved, of Nathan, who couldn't see past his own smallness, of all the people who'd tried to compress her into acceptable shapes. Then she thought of Bo, planning rooms tall enough for living in, not just existing. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't asking her to be less. He was offering to build something that fit her exactly as she was tall, strong, and finally, impossibly, wanted. Snow had dusted the mountains like sugar on Cookie's morning biscuits, and the winter festival was only 2 days away. Mira stood before Lila's mirror, trying to calm the butterflies that seemed to have taken permanent residence in her stomach since Bo had asked her to accompany him. Stop fidgeting, Lila commanded, pins between her teeth as she adjusted the hem of the purple-gray dress. You'd think you'd never been to a dance before. Not like this. Mira smoothed the soft wool nervously. The harvest dance was different. People were curious then. Now they have opinions. People always have opinions. Question is whether you'll let them matter. The dress had been Lila's finest, stored away for decades in lavender and hope. Together, they'd transformed it, letting out seams, adjusting the length, adding delicate embroidery at the cuffs that caught the light like frost. It was elegant without ostentation, sophisticated yet practical enough for a frontier celebration. There, Lila stepped back, surveying her work. You look like yourself, only more so. Mira studied her reflection. The woman looking back stood straight and tall, the dress emphasizing rather than hiding her height. The color brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes and complemented her sun-touched skin from months of mountain living. I'm still scared, she admitted. Good, means it matters. Lila began gathering her pins. Fear's just wisdom warning you to pay attention, but don't let it make your choices for you. A knock interrupted them. Cookie's gravelly voice carried through the door. That nephew of yours is here, Lila, looking nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Mira's heart jumped. She wasn't ready, would never be ready for the way the town would look at them. Judge them. Whisper behind their hands about the camp woman and the damaged soldier who'd lost his mind to her height. Courage, Lila whispered, squeezing her hand. Remember, you're not asking their permission to be happy. Bo waited in the main room, his back to them as he studied one of Lila's quilts on the wall. He wore a black coat she'd never seen before, well fitted across his broad shoulders, with his boots polished to a shine that seemed almost foreign on a man who spent his days among sawdust and pine sap. He turned at their entrance, and the look on his face stopped her breath. Wonder, admiration, and something deeper that made her cheeks warm, all written plain in his expression. You're beautiful, he said simply, as if stating an immutable fact of nature. So are you, she replied, meaning it. The formal clothes didn't diminish his rugged appeal, but rather refined it, like polishing stone to reveal hidden depths. He offered his arm, and she took it, noting how naturally they fit together, her height complementing his rather than competing. Cookie had brought around the borrowed sleigh, complete with bells that chimed softly in the cold air. Wait! Lila disappeared inside, returning with a deep blue shawl. Can't have you freezing before you even get there. As they settled into the sleigh, Mira pulled the shawl close, grateful for both its warmth and the way it wrapped around her like armor. Bo took up the reins, and they glided into the winter evening, bells singing their arrival to the stars. The road to town wound through forests transformed by snow, every branch carrying its burden of white. The moon had risen full and bright, turning the world silver and shadow. For a while, neither spoke, content with the whisper of runners on snow and their own thundering hearts. I should warn you, Bo said eventually. Nathan Hargrove will likely be there. His family never misses the winter festival. Mira's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen her former intended since that horrible day at the train station. Let him be there. I'm not the same woman who stepped off that train. No, Bo agreed quietly. You're not. The Grange Hall blazed with light, lanterns strung like stars along the eaves. Music spilled into the night, fiddle and accordion mixing with laughter and the stamp of dancing feet. Sleighs and wagons crowded the yard, horses stamping and blowing steam in the cold air. As Bo helped her down, Mira caught sight of faces in the windows, some curious, some hostile, all watching. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and let Bo lead her up the steps. The music faltered as they entered. Conversations died mid-sentence. The crowd seemed to part before them, creating an aisle of stares and whispers. Mira felt every eye in the room track their progress, measuring, judging, condemning. Then she saw him. Nathan Hargrove stood near the punch bowl, a petite blonde woman on his arm. Everything Mira wasn't. Small, delicate, appropriately sized for a man who needed to look down at his wife. His face went pale, then red as their eyes met. Steady, Bo murmured, his hand warm on her elbow. But Mira didn't need steadying, looking at Nathan Small. Ordinary Nathan with his small. Ordinary wife, she felt only a distant pity. He'd chosen safety over possibility, convention over connection. Let him have it. The music resumed tentatively, couples beginning to move again. Bo guided her to the dance floor, and she saw the moment of decision in his eyes. They could stay on the edges, minimize attention, try to blend. Instead, he led her to the very center of the floor. "May I have this dance, Miss Elena?" he asked formally, loud enough to carry, "You may, Mr. Calder." He took her in his arms, and the world narrowed to just them, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. He led her into a waltz. Mira had learned to dance in Philadelphia, but always as the follower who had to compensate for shorter partners, bending and diminishing herself to match their stride. With Bo, she could stand straight, their heights aligned perfectly, her eyes level with his jaw, his shoulder just right for her hand. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, each step natural and unforced. "Everyone's staring?" she whispered. "Let them." He spun her gently, her skirts flaring. "They're seeing something they don't understand, two people who fit." And they did fit, not just physically, but in the way they moved, breathed, existed in the same space without either having to become less. Other couples began to dance, the floor filling. But Mira barely noticed. The world had shrunk to Bo's hands, steady and sure, and the look in his eyes that said she was exactly where she belonged. The song ended, but before they could leave the floor, the fiddle struck up again a livelier tune that had couples forming for a reel. Bo raised an eyebrow in question, and Mira nodded. Why not? If they were going to be a spectacle, they might as well enjoy it. The reel required changing partners, and Mira found herself passed from hand to hand, some men stiff with disapproval, others curious, a few genuinely friendly. Young Tom from the camp grinned as he spun her, whispering, "You look grand. Miss Mira, don't let anyone tell you different." But then the pattern brought her face to face with Nathan. He had no choice but to take her hands, the dance demanding it. Up close, she could see sweat beading his forehead despite the cool air. "Mira," he said stiffly. "Nathan." They moved through the steps mechanically. He had to reach up to her, and she saw the moment he realized it the full impact of what he'd rejected. Not just her height, but her strength, her grace, her ability to fill a room with presence. I hope you're well," he managed. "I'm very well, thank you." "Working at the camp, I heard." "Yes, honest work for honest pay." She let him spin her, noting how he struggled with her momentum. "I hope you're happy with your choice." His eyes darted to his wife, dancing with another partner, pretty, petite, perfectly proportioned to make him feel tall. "She's suitable." "Suitable," Mira repeated softly. What a small word for a life partner. The pattern separated them before he could reply. And then Bo was there again, catching her hands with visible relief. They finished the dance in silence, but his thumb traced comforting circles on her palm. When the music paused, he guided her toward the refreshment table. Mrs. Clearwater stood nearby with her coterie, their whispers carrying clearly. "Shameless, parading about like that. You know she's living in sin up at that camp." Poor Bo Calder, taken in by her. Height. Bo's jaw tightened, but Mira touched his arm. "Would you fetch me some punch? I find I'm quite parched." He looked reluctant to leave her, but she smiled reassurance. As he moved away, she turned to face the women directly. Mrs. Clearwater, ladies." She inclined her head politely. "Enjoying the festival?" They stared, clearly not expecting direct confrontation. Mrs. Clearwater recovered first, her smile sharp as glass. "Indeed, though some of us maintain proper standards for such events." Standards. Mira appeared to consider this. "You mean like kindness, charity, not bearing false witness against thy neighbor. I mean decent women who know their place." "And what is my place?" "Exactly. Should I crouch to appear shorter, bind myself to seem smaller, refuse honest work because it offends your sensibilities?" Mira stepped closer, using her height deliberately. "Or perhaps my place is exactly where I choose to stand tall. Employed, and accompanying a good man who sees my worth beyond inches and gossip. You dare. I dare to live, Mrs. Clearwater, without your permission or approval." She smiled sweetly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I see my escort returning." Beau appeared with 2 cups of punch, his expression carefully neutral. As they moved away, he murmured, "Making friends, clarifying positions." She sipped the punch, tart and sweet on her tongue. "I'm tired of their whispers being louder than my truth." "And what is your truth?" She looked at him then, this man who'd never asked her to be less than she was, who planned rooms tall enough for living, not just existing, who faced down a room full of judgment just to dance with her in the center of it all. "My truth is that I'm done apologizing for the space I take up in the world." She set down her punch, decision crystallizing. "Dance with me again, Beau, in the middle of the floor where everyone can see." His smile was answer enough. As he led her back among the spinning couples, Mira caught sight of their reflection in the hall's windows, tall and perfectly matched, moving together as if the music played for them alone. Let them whisper, she thought as Beau spun her into the light. She'd found something worth more than their approval, a partner who celebrated her height rather than suffered it, who saw her strength as beautiful rather than threatening. The fiddles sang high and sweet, and Mira Elena danced in the center of it all, uncowed, unbent, and utterly, radiantly unbowed. The whispers started as ripples and grew to waves. By Monday morning, the entire camp buzzed with speculation about Mira and Beau's appearance at the winter festival. She tried to focus on her work, but concentration proved elusive when every footstep outside her door might bring another piece of gossip or confrontation. It came at midday in the form of 3 women from town. Mira recognized them from church misses. Dalton, the banker's wife, Mrs. Pritchard, who ran the boarding house with her sister, and young Mrs. Hargrove, Nathan's bride. They stood in her sewing room doorway like avenging angels, faces pinched with righteous disapproval. "We've come to speak with you about your behavior, Mrs.?" Dalton announced without preamble. Mira set down the shirt she was mending. "Please, come in. Would you care for tea?" They entered reluctantly, as if the very air might contaminate them. "Mrs." Hargrove hung back, her delicate features twisted with discomfort. "We don't want your tea, Mrs.," Pritchard said sharply. "We want you to understand that decent women don't approve of your situation." "My situation?" Mira kept her voice level, though her hands clenched in her lap. "Living here among all these men, parading about with Beau Calder as if you have any right to a respectable man's attention. Mrs. Dalton's voice dripped acid. "It's unseemly. You're setting a terrible example." "An example of what working for my living, attending a public dance with a gentleman escort. You know very well what we mean." Mrs. Pritchard leaned forward. "That man is damaged goods, and you're taking advantage of his weakness. Everyone knows the war left him not quite right in the head. Why else would he court someone like you?" The words hit like physical blows. Mira stood slowly, unfolding to her full height. The women stepped back instinctively. "Someone like me," she repeated softly. "You mean someone tall?" "Freakishly tall, Mrs." Dalton corrected. "Unnaturally so. No proper man wants a wife who looks down on him." "Is that what you told yourself, Mrs. Hargrove?" Mira turned to Nathan's wife, who flinched. "When he came home that day after rejecting me at the train station, did he tell you why, that he'd corresponded with me for 8 months? Proposed by letter, then cast me aside the moment he saw I was taller?" The young woman's face flushed. "Nathan chose appropriately. A wife should compliment her husband, not overshadow him." "And you compliment him perfectly. Don't you small enough to make him feel big? Quiet enough to make him feel loud? Dim enough to make him feel bright?" Mira saw the barb strike home. "Tell me, does he ever mention the woman he didn't choose when he looks at you? Does he see what he wanted or what he settled for? How dare you? I dare because I'm through being polite to people who show me no courtesy. Mira moved closer, noting how they clustered together like chickens facing a hawk. You came here to shame me for existing while tall, to convince me I'm stealing something that belongs to smaller, more appropriate women. But here's what you don't understand. Beau Calder doesn't need protection from me. He's the strongest man I know, war-damaged or not. Strong men don't choose aberrations. Mrs. Dalton spat. The word hung in the air like a curse. Mira felt it burrow under her skin, seeking the soft places where doubt still lived. Aberration, freak, unnatural. You're right, she said quietly, startling them. I am different. I've been different my whole life. Too tall for door frames, too large for expectations, too much for narrow minds to comprehend. But different doesn't mean less than, it doesn't mean unworthy of love. Love misses. Pritchard laughed harshly. You think that's love? It's curiosity at best, pity at worst, when the novelty wears off. Is that your experience talking? Mira interrupted. Is your husband's affection so shallow that you can't imagine depth in others? Or are you so convinced of your own superiority that you can't fathom a man choosing something beyond the ordinary? Before they could respond, heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Beau filled the doorway, his face dark with anger. Wood shavings clung to his clothes and his hands were balled into fists. Ladies, he said with icy politeness. I heard you were visiting. Beau, Mrs. Dalton tried for maternal concern. We're only thinking of your welfare. My welfare. His voice could have frozen flame. My welfare is none of your concern. But since you've made it your business, let me be clear. I've heard what you call Miss Elena, aberration, freak, unnatural. He stepped into the room, and suddenly it seemed too small for his presence. You want to know what's unnatural, sending boys to die in fields they'd never seen for causes they didn't understand? Watching your tent mate's head explode from cannon fire while he was telling you about his sweetheart back home. That's unnatural. The women shrank back, but he wasn't finished. You know what's not unnatural? A woman standing tall instead of cringing, having the courage to face the world without apology, being strong enough to rebuild after disappointment. He moved to stand beside Mira. Not behind or in front, but equal. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why. We're only trying to protect Mrs. Hargrove began weakly. Protect who, me? Beau laughed, bitter and sharp. I've survived Antietam and Gettysburg. I think I can survive the terrible danger of courting a tall woman. It's inappropriate. Mrs. Dalton insisted, rallying. She lives here unchaperoned. She works here, Beau corrected. Honestly, which is more than can be said for those who spend their days spreading poison dressed as concern. If you continue this association, Mrs. Pritchard threatened, don't expect welcome in town, either of you. If the price of your welcome is Mira making herself smaller to ease your insecurity, then keep it. His voice carried the finality of a closing door. Now get out. All of you. They left in a flutter of offended dignity and rustling skirts. Mira stood frozen, overwhelmed by the confrontation and Beau's fierce defense. When the door closed behind them, she sank into her chair. You shouldn't have done that, she said quietly. They'll make your life difficult. They already have. 15 years of sideways looks and whispered pity because the war broke something in me. He knelt beside her chair, looking up at her with intense eyes. You know what broke my ability to pretend their opinions matter more than truth? What truth? That you're magnificent, not despite your height because of it, because of everything it represents, your refusal to diminish yourself, your strength in the face of their smallness. He took her hands, calloused palms gentle against hers. I meant what I said at the dance. We fit, Mira, not just physically, but in all the ways that matter. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. They called me an aberration. They call anything they don't understand aberrant. Love across class lines. Women who work. Men who came back from war different. He squeezed her hands. Maybe we are aberrations. Maybe that's what makes us right for each other. She looked at him, really looked, saw the pain he carried like an invisible wound, the strength it took to choose life after seeing so much death, the courage required to defend her publicly when it would cost him the town's last vestiges of acceptance. I don't want you to lose your community because of me, she said. What community? The one that whispers behind my back, that tolerates me only because I keep to the woods and don't remind them of the war. He stood, pulling her up with him. You haven't cost me anything, Mira. You've given me reason to want more than mere existence. Standing together in the small sewing room, surrounded by scraps of fabric and the lingering echoes of cruel words, Mira made a choice. She stepped forward, closing the small distance between them, and rested her forehead against his shoulder. I'm not an easy choice, she whispered. His arms came around her, solid and sure. Neither am I. Maybe that's why we understand each other. They stood there as afternoon shadows lengthened. Two people the world called broken, finding wholeness in each other's presence. Outside, the camp continued its rhythm saws singing through wood. Men calling to each other, Cookie banging pots with aggressive cheer. They'll talk, Mira said eventually. Let them. Bo pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. I've faced Confederate cavalry charges. I think I can handle a few gossiping biddies. Despite everything, she laughed, surprised by the sound, by her ability to find humor amid the wreckage of the day. That's better, he said softly. Don't let them steal your laughter. Mira, it's too precious. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering near the main camp building. Harvey stood at the center, gesticulating wildly. Now what? Mira sighed. They descended to find most of the camp assembled. Harvey's face was red with drink and righteousness. It ain't proper, he was declaring. A woman living here, tempting decent men, carrying on with whoever she pleases. Careful, Harvey, Tom warned. You're speaking of a lady. A lady, Harvey spat. More like... The rest of his words were lost as Bo's fist connected with his jaw. Harvey went down hard, blood spurting from his nose. The crowd erupted in shouts and movement. But Foreman Hutchins' voice cut through the chaos. Enough, Harvey. You're fired. Clear out by morning. Calder, my office, now. As Bo followed the foreman, he caught Mira's eye. No regret showed in his face, only calm certainty. She watched him go, her heart a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Tom appeared at her elbow. Don't worry, Miss Mira. The boys have been waiting for someone to shut Harvey up for months. Bo just gave them what they wanted. Around her, she realized the crowd wasn't hostile. Some men nodded approval. Others muttered about Harvey having it coming. A few even smiled at her, not leering or mocking, but genuine human warmth. Besides, young Sam piped up. Ain't nothing wrong with being tall. My ma was taller than my PA, and they were married 40 years. Happily? Mira asked. Sam grinned. Pa always said the view was better looking up than down. As the crowd dispersed, Mira climbed the stairs to her sewing room. Through the window, she could see the foreman's office, where Bo's tall form was visible through lamplight. Whatever happened, they'd crossed a line today. The town's judgment had invaded her sanctuary, and Bo had chosen her publicly, violently, irrevocably. She picked up her needle and resumed work, but her mind wandered. An aberration, they'd called her. Perhaps she was. But if being aberrant meant standing tall, working honestly, and inspiring a good man to defend her worth well, then she'd be the finest aberration the territory had ever seen. The storm rolled in from the north like an angry god, turning the world white and violent. Mira had lived through Pennsylvania winters, But nothing like this mountain fury that screamed through the pine trees and rattled the windows of her small room. It was 3 days after the confrontation with the town women. Bo had kept his job. Hutchins valued good timbermen over Harvey's troublemaking, but something had shifted in the camp's atmosphere. The men treated Mira with newfound respect, nodding when they passed, some even defending her when talk grew cruel. Now, as darkness fell on the storm's second day, she worked by lamplight, finishing a set of shirts for the Millerville General Store. The contract would pay well, enough to send some money to her cousin in Philadelphia and still save for what she didn't dare name the hope that bloomed in her chest when Bo spoke of building tall rooms. Cookie burst through the door without knocking, his wild hair wilder with panic. "It's Calder Rock, slide up at Devil's Cut. They're bringing him down now." The needle fell from nerveless fingers. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Doc's already at the main building. You might want to—" But Mira was already moving, grabbing her father's medical bag, the one thing of value she'd kept through all her travels. She plunged into the storm, ice pellets stinging her face, wind trying to push her back. Let it try. Mountains of wind couldn't stop her now. The main building blazed with lanterns. Men clustered outside despite the weather, their faces grave. They parted as she approached, and she heard someone mutter, "That's his woman. Let her through." His woman. The word should have scandalized her. Instead, they felt like armor against the terror clawing at her chest. Inside, Doc Holcomb worked over a still form on the mess table. Too much blood pooled on the rough wood. Bo's face was white as the storm outside, a gash running from temple to jaw. His left arm bent at an impossible angle. "Miss Elena." The doctor didn't look up. "If you're going to faint, do it outside." "I don't faint." She moved to the opposite side of the table, automatically checking Bo's pulse, rapid but strong. "What do you need?" Doc Holcomb studied her for a heartbeat, then nodded. "You've done this before. 3 years in a field hospital. Tell me what you need." They worked in synchronized efficiency, cleaning wounds, setting bones, stitching torn flesh. Mira's hands remained steady, even as her heart shattered with each pained moan from Bo's unconscious lips. The storm howled outside, but inside there was only the circle of lamplight and the desperate work of keeping death at bay. "The arm's bad," Doc muttered, "crushed between 2 boulders. I've set what I can, but infection's the real danger now. That and whether he wakes up. Head wounds are tricky, could be fine, could never be right again." Mira's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. Never right again. They already said Bo wasn't right, broken by war and solitude. What would this break in him? "He's strong," she said firmly. "Physical strength won't matter if his mind's gone." Doc began packing his instruments. "I've done what I can. Someone needs to watch him through the night, keep him warm, try to get water in him if he wakes." "I'll do it." "Figured you would." He paused at the door. "Miss Elena, that work you just did, finest field assistance I've seen. Your father trained you well." After he left, Mira arranged chairs to create a makeshift bed beside the table. The men had built up the fire until the room was almost warm, and someone, Tom, she thought, left a pile of blankets and a bucket of clean snow for water. She settled in for the long watch, one hand resting lightly on Bo's chest to monitor his breathing. In the dancing firelight, she could see the scars she'd only glimpsed before a puckered bullet wound on his shoulder, saber cuts across his ribs. This body had already survived so much violence. "Don't you dare die on me, Bo Calder," she whispered fiercely. "Not when we've just started. Not when you finally made me believe I could be wanted as I am." The hours crawled by. She bathed his fevered face, dribbled water between cracked lips, talked to fill the terrible silence. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother who died young, about learning medicine at her father's side. She spoke of the war years, the endless stream of broken boys, the night she'd had to choose between 2 dying soldiers and could only save one. I saved the younger one, she confessed to his still face. 17, maybe 18. The other man was older, had a wedding ring. I've wondered every day since if I chose wrong. If some wife waited forever for a man who didn't come home because I decided youth deserved more years. Beau's hand twitched, fingers curling slightly. Hope flared in her chest. That's it, she encouraged. Come back. I know it's peaceful wherever you are, but I need you here. I need you to wake up and tell me again that I don't have to make myself smaller, that we fit, that you want to build tall rooms for living, not just existing. His eyelids fluttered. A low groan escaped his lips. Beau, she leaned closer. Can you hear me? His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening. Mira. The word came out cracked and weak. I'm here. Tears she'd held back for hours finally spilled over. You're safe. There was a rock slide, but you're going to be fine. He tried to move, gasped at the pain from his arm. She pressed him gently back down. Don't. Your arm's broken, maybe in several places. You have to be still. Feel like mountain fell on me. Part of one did, from what I heard. His gaze tracked around the room, taking in the makeshift hospital setup, finally returning to her face. You've been here, all night. Where else would I be? Town women said you were unnatural. Then unnatural I'll be, if it means staying with you. His good hand reached up, fingers tangling weakly in her loose hair. She'd unpinned it hours ago, letting it fall around her shoulders like a curtain. Beautiful, he murmured, like an angel, tall angel. You're delirious from pain medicine. No, saw clear, when rock was falling. Thought, might die without telling you. Telling me what? But his eyes had drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling him under. Mira caught his hand as it fell, holding it between both of hers. Outside, the storm was breaking, wind dying to whispers, snow falling soft as forgiveness. Tom peered in at dawn. How is he? He woke once, spoke clearly. I think he'll be all right. Course he will. He's got something to live for now. Tom brought her coffee and biscuit. Cookie's making broth for when he wakes proper. Half the camp's been asking after him. Really, Beau's a good man. Quiet, keeps to himself. But he's saved more than one life up on that mountain. Jake Henner says Beau pushed him clear just before the slide hit, probably why his arm got crushed so bad. Mira looked at Beau's sleeping face, seeing new lines of pain carved there. He'd put himself in danger to save another. Of course he had. The day passed in a blur of changing bandages, spooning broth, monitoring fever. Doc Holcomb came twice, pronounced himself satisfied with Beau's progress, and warned about the long recovery ahead. That arm may never be quite right, might affect his work. He'll adapt, Mira said firmly. He survived worse. As evening approached, Lila arrived with fresh supplies and clean clothes for Mira. Whole town's talking, she announced, settling beside her nephew's bed. How you worked through the storm to save him. How you haven't left his side. They're probably scandalized. Some are. Others are saying maybe they misjudged you. Lila studied her nephew's face with worried eyes. He looks better than I feared. He's strong. So are you. Lila squeezed her shoulder. I'll sit with him while you clean up and rest. Can't have you collapsing when he needs you. Mira reluctantly agreed. Stumbling to her room on legs that felt like water, she washed, changed clothes, tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind kept returning to that moment when Beau opened his eyes and called her beautiful, when he said he'd seen clear as rocks fell. She returned to find him awake, trying to sit up despite Lila's scolding. I'm fine. Aunt Lila, just need... He stopped as Mira entered, his whole face changing. There you are. Here I am? She moved to his side, checking his bandages with practiced hands. How's the pain? Manageable. Lila says you haven't left since they brought me down. Someone had to make sure you didn't die from stubbornness. Not stubborn, just had something important to say. Still do. Lila looked between them, then stood with exaggerated casualness. I'll just go check on Cookie's soup. Alone. Mira sank into the chair beside him. You should rest. I've been resting. Now I need to say this. While I'm clear-headed. He caught her hand with his good one. When that rock was coming down, all I could think was that I'd wasted time, wasted chances. I promised myself if I lived, I'd stop wasting both. Bo, I love you, Mira Elene, not despite your height or because of it, but for the whole of who you are, your strength, your refusal to shrink, the way you look at me like I'm not broken. His grip tightened. I know I'm not whole. No, I may never be the man I was before the war, but what I am, what I have, it's yours if you want it. The words hung between them like stars bright, distant, almost too beautiful to trust. Mira had been disappointed before, had believed in words that crumbled at first test. If I wanted someone whole, she said slowly, I'd have stayed in Philadelphia and married a banker. I don't want perfect, Bo, I want real. I want someone who sees me clearly and doesn't flinch. Then you have him, broken parts and all. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his, feeling his breath mingle with hers. I love you too, broken parts and all. When she pulled back, he was smiling, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger despite the fresh scars. So what now, she asked. Now I heal. Then we build those tall rooms I mentioned. Make a life that fits us both. He grimaced as pain shot through his arm. Might take longer than planned. I'm not going anywhere. No, he agreed softly, wonderingly. You're not. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world clean and white and new. Through the window, Mira could see stars emerging in the clear sky, distant lights that didn't care about the small prejudices of small people, that shone equally on the tall and small, the broken and whole, the different and ordinary. She sat with Bo as night deepened, their hands entwined, neither speaking because everything important had been said. Tomorrow would bring challenges his slow healing, the town's continued judgment, the uncertain future of a tall woman and a war-broken man. But tonight, in this circle of warmth and light carved from winter's fury, they were simply two people who fit together in all the ways that mattered. And that, Mira thought as Bo's breathing deepened into healing sleep, was miracle enough for any lifetime. The question came on a cold March evening, 2 weeks into Bo's recovery. Doc Holcomb had just finished examining the injured arm, his expression grave as he rewrapped the bandages. The bones are knitting, but not straight. You'll have limited use, maybe 40% strength if you're lucky. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You won't be able to work timber again. Calder, not safely. Mira felt Bo's whole body tense beneath her hand. She'd been sitting with him every evening after finishing her sewing, watching him struggle with pain and the deeper agony of forced stillness. Now this the loss of not just strength, but purpose. I see, Bo said quietly, too quietly. After the doctor left, silence filled the room like smoke. Mira busied herself straightening supplies, giving Bo time to absorb the blow. Through the window, she could see men returning from the day's cutting, their voices carrying on the crisp air a world Bo could no longer be part of. Say it, he finally spoke, voice rough. Say what? Whatever you're thinking, that you signed on for a whole man, not a cripple, that you don't need dead weight dragging you down. She turned slowly, anger kindling in her chest. Is that what you think of me, that I'd abandon you the moment you're less than perfect? I think you deserve better than a broken-down soldier who can't even work an honest day anymore. Stop! She moved to the bed, standing tall over him. Just stop. You don't get to decide what I deserve. That's my choice. Mira. No, You listened when I was the one drowning in self-pity. Now you'll listen to me." She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his good hand. "Do you love me less because I'm taller than other women?" "Of course not." "Then why would I love you less because your arm won't be as strong?" She squeezed his fingers. "You're more than your ability to cut trees. Bo Calder, if you can't see that, then perhaps the rock slide damaged more than your arm." He turned his face away, but not before she saw the sheen of tears he'd never shed for his physical pain. "What am I if not a timberman? It's all I've known since the war." "Then maybe it's time to know something else." She stood, pacing the small room. "You can read and write better than half the men here. You know these mountains like you were born from them. You understand lumber grades, fair prices, which trees to cut and which to leave for seed." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's more than one way to work in timber. Hutchins won't be foreman forever. The company needs men who understand both the forest and the business." They won't want to lose your knowledge. Talk to Hutchins. Make yourself valuable in a different way." She stopped pacing, fixing him with a firm stare. "Or are you so attached to martyrdom that you'd rather wallow than adapt?" Anger flashed in his eyes good. Anger was better than despair. "You think it's that easy, just decide to be something else?" "I think it's that necessary. Unless you plan to lie in this bed feeling sorry for yourself while life passes by." "That's rich, coming from you." "What's that supposed to mean?" He struggled to sit up, grimacing. "You know exactly what I mean. How long did you let Nathan's rejection define you? How many nights did you sleep on church porches rather than demand better?" The words stung because they were true. "That's different." "Is it you were ready to disappear because one small man couldn't handle your height? Now you're lecturing me about adaptation." They glared at each other across the small space. Two proud people stripped down to raw truth. Then, unexpectedly, Mira laughed short and sharp, but genuine. "We're quite a pair. Aren't we both so convinced we're worthless the moment we don't fit expectations?" Bo's anger cracked, a rueful smile pulling at his lips. "Stubborn fools. Aunt Lila calls us—" "She's not wrong." Mira returned to the bed, this time sitting closer. "But maybe that's why we understand each other. We both know what it's like to be told we're not enough. And we're both too pig-headed to believe it." "Most days." She traced the edge of his bandage gently. "Will you at least talk to Hutchins? See what's possible?" "Will you come with me?" "If you want me there." "I want you everywhere," he said simply. "That's the problem. I can't see a future that doesn't have you in it, but I can't ask you to tie yourself to a man who might not be able to provide—" "There you go again, deciding what I can and can't choose." She leaned down, bringing their faces level. "I don't need you to provide for me, Bo. I have my own skills, my own income. What I need is a partner, someone who sees me as equal, not a burden or a prize or something to be diminished. You're none of those things. Then stop trying to protect me from choosing you. If I wanted safe and easy, I'd have stayed east." She pulled back slightly. "I came here following a promise that turned to dust. But maybe that was meant to happen. Maybe I had to lose what I thought I wanted to find what I actually needed." "And what do you need?" "Someone who looks at me like I'm enough, exactly as I am. Someone who makes me want to be brave." She touched his face gently. "Someone who plans tall rooms for living, even when his own world is shrinking." Bo caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "What if I can't build those rooms now? What if this arm never—" "Then we'll build them together, or hire someone, or live in a tent if we have to." She smiled. "The rooms were never the point. Bo, the living is—" A knock interrupted them. Hutchins entered without waiting for permission, his weathered face unreadable. "Calder, Miss L.N.A." He pulled up a chair, settling his compact frame with a grunt. "Doc tells me you won't be swinging an axe again." "No, sir," Bo confirmed tightly. "Shame. You're one of the best I've had." Hutchins pulled out his pipe, taking his time lighting it. Course, the best lumberman I ever knew couldn't swing an axe to save his life. Pencil pusher from Portland. But he could look at a stand of timber and tell you its worth down to the penny. Save the company thousands by knowing which lots to buy and which to pass. Mira felt Bo straighten slightly. What happened to him? Retired rich at 50. Lives in San Francisco now. I hear... Hutchins puffed thoughtfully. Been thinking I need someone like that. Someone who knows trees from the ground up but can see the business side too. Lot of expansion coming, railroads pushing through next year. Company's going to need buyers. Gradermen, someone to deal with the mills. I don't have experience with... You have the only experience that matters. You know timber, and you're honest. Rest can be learned. Hutchins stood. Think on it. Job comes with a house in town, salary instead of day wages. Might suit a man looking to settle down. He left without waiting for response. Mira and Bo sat in stunned silence. Did he just offer you a promotion? Mira finally asked. I think so. Bo shook his head slowly. Town work, regular wages, a house. You don't sound pleased. I don't know what I am. He met her eyes. Except grateful you bullied me out of self-pity long enough to hear it. I didn't bully. I firmly encouraged. With all the gentleness of a cavalry charge. Would anything else have worked? No, he admitted. I needed someone to kick me out of my own head. Seems that's becoming a habit of yours. Only when you're being an idiot about your own worth. She stood, smoothing her skirts. Will you take the job? Would you come with me to town? As... He paused, color rising in his face. This is backward. I had plans, a proper proposal when I could stand, when I had something to offer. Bo Calder, are you trying to propose to me while lying flat on your back with your arm in a sling? I'm trying to propose to you, period. Badly, apparently. He struggled upright despite her protests, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Mira Elene, I'm a broken-down soldier with one good arm and more ghosts than prospects. I can offer you a job I haven't accepted yet, in a town that whispers about you, with a man who might never be whole. But I can also offer you partnership, respect, and rooms tall enough for you to never have to duck again. Is that all? His face fell. I know it's not much. You forgot love, she interrupted softly. You forgot the promise to see me clearly, to stand beside me as equals. To never ask me to be less than I am. I could never forget that. It's the foundation everything else builds on. Then yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll move to town and weather their whispers. Yes, I'll help you learn a new trade and build a new life. She cupped his face in her hands. Yes to all of it, as long as we do it together. He pulled her down into a kiss, their first real kiss. Not stolen or desperate, but chosen and sure. When they parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. You know what this means, Mrs. Clearwater will have to see us at every town function. The woman who wouldn't rent you a room will have to make polite conversation at church socials. Good, Mira said fiercely. Let her choke on her own prejudice. That's my girl, gentle as a cavalry charge and twice as devastating. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see men gathering, lanterns bobbing in the dusk. Tom burst through the door. Sorry to interrupt, but thought you should know town delegations coming up the road. Looks like Mrs. Clearwater and her whole crew. Coming here. Why? Mira moved to the window. Heard about the engagement. I expect news travels fast when Cookie's involved. Tom grinned. Want me to tell them you're indisposed? No, Bo said, standing carefully with Mira's support. They want to see the timberman and his tall bride. Let them. But they'll see us standing together. You shouldn't be up. I've lain down for them long enough. Time to stand, even if it hurts. Mira looked at him pale but determined, leaning heavily on her but not hiding it. Together. They were quite a sight, the too tall woman and the broken soldier, neither trying to be less than they were. Together, then, she agreed. They moved to the door, Beau's weight familiar against her side. Outside, lanterns approached like judgmental stars, but Mira found she didn't care. She'd chosen her path, her partner, her life. The town could accept it or not. She stood tall beside the man she loved and waited for the world to adjust to them for once. The town council meeting was held in the Grange Hall where Mira had first danced with Beau. Now, instead of music and laughter, the space hummed with tension as thick as morning fog. Every seat was filled, townsfolk craning to see the tall woman who dared to stand at the podium. Beau sat in the front row, his arms still bound, but his presence solid as mountain stone. Beside him, Lila clutched her worn Bible, ready to weaponize scripture if needed. Even Cookie had come down from the camp, scowling at anyone who whispered too loudly. Mayor Whitfield called for order, his gavel sharp in the charged air. "We're here to discuss the proposed expansion of timber operations into the northern watershed. Miss Elena has asked to address the council on behalf of the lumber workers. She has no standing here." Mrs. Clearwater objected immediately. "She's not a property owner, not married, not... She's a tax-paying resident who works for the largest employer in the county." Beau interrupted, his voice carrying despite his seated position. "That gives her more right to speak than gossips who contribute nothing but poison." "Mr. Calder, you're out of order," the mayor warned. "Then I yield my time to Miss Elena." Beau responded smoothly, "As is my right as a property owner and future manager of timber acquisitions." Mira stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye. She'd dressed carefully, her best working dress, hair pinned severely, her father's watch chain visible at her waist. Professional, respectable, and uncompromisingly tall. "Gentlemen of the council," she began, then paused deliberately. "And concerned citizens, I come before you not as the oddity you've whispered about, but as someone who's lived among the men who harvest your prosperity. I've mended their clothes, tended their wounds, and heard their fears about what unchecked expansion means." "Trees grow back," Councilman Harris interrupted. "Always have." "Do they?" Mira pulled out a map, spreading it on the podium. "This shows the watershed 20 years ago. Here's today. Notice the difference." The green areas had shrunk dramatically, brown patches spreading like disease where forests once stood. "The northern watershed is our last intact forest system. It holds the snowpack that feeds our rivers, prevents the floods that devastated Millerville last spring. Cut it down, and Timber Hollow won't deserve its name anymore. It'll just be hollow." "Economic scaremongering," someone called out. "Is it?" Mira's voice rose, filling the space. "Ask the wives whose husbands come home with stories of hillsides collapsing because there are no roots to hold them. Ask the fishermen why the salmon runs decrease each year as silt chokes the streams. Ask yourselves why 3 towns east of here are ghost settlements now. Their mills silent because they took everything and left nothing for tomorrow." "What would a seamstress know of forest management, Mrs.?" Dalton demanded. "What would a banker's wife know of honest work?" Mira shot back. "But to answer your question, I know what the men who actually cut the trees tell me. Men like Tom Garrett, whose father taught him to read the forest like scripture. Men like Jake Henner, whose watch slopes he logged as a boy turned to wasteland." She paused, scanning the crowd. "And I know what Beau Calder knows, that sustainable harvesting isn't just moral. It's profitable. Take only the mature trees, leave the young to grow, protect the watersheds, and you'll have timber for generations. Clear-cut everything, and in 10 years you'll be another empty town wondering where the prosperity went." "Pretty speech," Mayor Whitfield said carefully. "But the company needs profit now, not promises for the future." "Then let me speak to profit." Mira pulled out another document, columns of figures in Beau's careful hand. "These numbers show projected earnings from sustainable cutting versus clear cutting. Yes, the immediate profit is less, but over 20 years, sustainable methods yield 3 times the total revenue. Plus, the land remains productive indefinitely. Where did these figures come from? Councilman Harris demanded. From someone who understands both trees and mathematics, Bo said, standing despite his obvious pain. Someone who spent weeks analyzing growth rates, market prices, and harvest yields. Someone the company just hired to manage their acquisitions precisely because he thinks beyond next quarter's profits. You're biased, Mrs. Clearwater accused, influenced by her. You mean influenced by intelligence and foresight? Bo moved to stand beside Mira, not behind or in front, but equal. Then yes, I'm thoroughly influenced. This woman saw what none of us would admit, that we're destroying our own future for short-term gain. The railroad's coming through, another councilman argued. They'll want timber for ties, construction. We need to cut more, not less. The railroad's exactly why we need restraint, Mira countered. They'll bring demand, yes, but also competition. Towns with exhausted forests will watch the trains pass by, carrying business to places that still have resources. Is that the future you want? The room erupted in arguments, neighbors turning on neighbors, economic anxiety warring with environmental concern. Through it all, Mira stood tall at the podium, weathering the storm of voices like a lighthouse in rough seas. Enough! Mayor Whitfield's gavel cracked like thunder. We'll put it to a vote. All in favor of restricting the northern watershed expansion. Hands rose slowly, some of the wives whose husbands worked the dangerous slopes. Younger councilmen with children to think of. Even a few surprising allies who'd been swayed by the numbers. All opposed. More hands, but not enough. Mira counted, heart hammering. Motion passes by 2 votes. The northern watershed will be designated for selective cutting only. The mayor looked exhausted. God help us if you're wrong. Miss LNA. God help us if I'm right and we did nothing, she replied quietly. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, people arguing and celebrating in equal measure, Mira felt her knees wobble. The weight of what she'd done standing before the entire town, challenging their assumptions, using her visibility as a weapon for change, crashed over her. Bo's good arm came around her waist, steady and sure. You were magnificent, he murmured. I was terrified. Couldn't tell. You looked like an avenging angel up there, all righteous fury and inconvenient truths. They made their way outside, where the spring evening painted the sky purple and gold. Groups of people clustered, still debating, but many nodded respectfully as Mira passed. Not all misses. Clearwater and her circle glared daggers, but more than before. Miss Elena, a small voice called. The girl from the general store stood with her mother, the same woman who'd yanked her away months ago. The child held a small wrapped package. This is for you, she said shyly, for being brave. Mira knelt, bringing herself to the girl's level. Inside the wrapping was a hand-sewn bookmark, crooked stitches spelling out "Stand Tall" in red thread. It's beautiful, Mira said, throat tight. Did you make this yourself? The girl nodded proudly. Mama helped. She says maybe tall isn't so bad if it helps you see far enough to save forests. Mira looked up at the woman, who flushed but met her gaze steadily. Perhaps I was hasty in my judgments, the mother admitted quietly. My husband works those slopes. What you said tonight about the dangers, he's been saying the same for months. I just didn't want to hear it. None of us want to hear difficult truths, Mira replied, standing. Thank you for the bookmark. I'll treasure it. As they walked away, Bo squeezed her hand. See one heart at a time, or one forest at a time. She looked back at the hall, where lights still burned and voices still argued. Do you think it will make a difference? You already have, win or lose. You stood up there as yourself, tall, intelligent, unafraid. You showed them that different doesn't mean less than. That's worth more than any vote. They reached Lila's house, where the older woman had tea and celebration cake waiting. As Mira sank into a chair, exhaustion hitting her like a felled tree. She realized something had shifted, not just in the town's perception of her, but in her perception of herself. She'd used her height as an advantage, standing at that podium where everyone had to look up to her. She'd used their discomfort with her presence to make them uncomfortable with their choices. She'd taken everything they'd whispered about her too tall, too bold, too much, and transformed it into a force for change. "Penny for your thoughts," Bo said, settling carefully beside her. "I'm thinking about perspectives," she said slowly. "They've always said I see the world differently because of my height. Tonight, I think that difference might have saved something precious. Tonight, you stood for more than forests." Lila interjected, bringing tea. "You stood for everyone who's been told they don't belong. That little girl with her bookmark, she'll remember this. When someone tells her she's too much or too little of something, she'll remember the tall woman who refused to shrink." Cookie, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, cleared his throat. "That was a hell of a thing. Miss Mira, pardon the language, but watching you up there, taking on the whole town council, reminded me why I fought in the war. Sometimes the right thing needs doing, even if it's not the easy thing." "Especially then," Bo agreed, raising his teacup in a toast, "to Mira Elene, who stands tall for all of us." They drank, the warmth of tea and friendship filling the room. Outside, night settled over Timber Hollow, and somewhere in the northern watershed, ancient trees continued their patient growth, protected now by the courage of one woman who refused to make herself smaller to fit the world's expectations. The battle was won, but Mira knew the war continued. There would be more meetings, more confrontations, more moments when her height and presence would be weapons or targets. But tonight, surrounded by those who saw her truly, she felt something she hadn't experienced since stepping off that train in Missouri. She felt like she belonged. Not despite her differences, but because of them. Not by shrinking to fit, but by standing tall enough to change the shape of the space around her. The moon hung full and silver above the boarding house, casting long shadows across the porch where Mira stood in her mother's wedding dress. Lila had spent days altering it, letting out seams and adding fabric until it fit perfectly, a cream silk that had yellowed to the color of aged pearls, beautiful in its imperfection. "You sure you want to do this here?" Lila asked, pinning the last adjustment. "After everything they've said, especially after everything they've said." Mira smoothed the skirt, feeling the weight of history in the fabric. "We're not hiding anymore. If Bo and I marry, we do it in daylight, in front of everyone who said it couldn't happen." Through the window, she could see preparations in the yard. Tom and the lumber crew had built an archway of pine boughs, filling the air with resin scent. Cookie commanded the outdoor kitchen with military precision, threatening anyone who came near his carefully tended roasts. Even Hutchins had come down from the mill, supervising table arrangements with the same attention he gave to timber contracts. "The whole town's talking," Lila reported. "Some saying they won't attend a wedding that makes a mockery of proper proportions, others curious to see if you'll have to bend down to kiss him." "Let them wonder." Mira turned from the window. "Where's Bo?" "At the church with Reverend Morrison, convincing him to perform the ceremony. Poor man's been getting an earful from the proper ladies about sanctifying an unnatural union." Mira laughed, though worry threaded through it. So many things could go wrong. The Reverend could refuse. The town could boycott. Someone could object during the ceremony itself. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Mira, it's Tom. Got something for you." She opened the door to find several lumbermen crowding the hallway, faces scrubbed and hair slicked with pomade. Tom held out a wrapped bundle. "From all of us at the camp. Figured you should have something new for your wedding day." Inside was a shawl of the softest wool she'd ever touched, dyed the deep blue of mountain lakes. Embroidered along the edges were pine trees and stars, each stitch representing hours of secret work. "Old Sam's wife made it," Tom explained, suddenly shy, Said any woman brave enough to stand up to the town council deserved something beautiful to wear when she stands up for love. Tears threatened, but Mira blinked them back. It's perfect. Thank you, all of you. You stood for us with the watershed, Jake said gruffly. Figure we can stand for you today. They filed out, leaving Mira clutching the shawl like armor. These men rough, simple, often crude understood loyalty in ways the town's proper citizens never would. The ceremony was set for sunset. As the hour approached, Mira watched from her window as people gathered. Some came in their finest clothes, others in work wear straight from the mills. Children ran between the tables while their mothers tried to corral them. She spotted the little girl with her bookmark, wearing a pink dress and flower crown. But there were absences, too. Empty spaces where the Clearwaters and Daltons and their circle would have stood. The divide in Timber Hollow made visible in who came to celebrate and who stayed away in protest. Ready? Lila appeared at her elbow. No, yes, I don't know. Mira pressed a hand to her stomach. What if he realizes? Realizes what? That you're magnificent. He already knows that. Lila adjusted the shawl around Mira's shoulders. That man's been ready to marry you since the night he found you on that church porch. Everything else has just been waiting for you to believe it too. The walk to the yard felt both endless and too quick. Then the crowd parted, and Mira saw him. Bo stood under the pine arch, his good arm steady at his side while the injured one rested in a black silk sling. He'd trimmed his beard and wore a new black suit that emphasized his height and broad shoulders. When he saw her, his face transformed with wonder. She moved toward him, aware of every eye following her progress. Some watched with genuine joy, others with curiosity or barely concealed judgment. But as she drew closer to Bo, the crowd faded to background noise. You came, he said softly when she reached him. Where else would I be? I thought maybe the town's been talking about what you're giving up. Marrying a broken-down timber man. About how you could do better. Better than a man who sees me clearly, who stands beside me as an equal, who defends my worth to anyone who questions it. She shook her head. There is no better. Bo called her. Reverend Morrison cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, but determined Bo's persuasion mixed with his own conscience had won out over the proper lady's objections. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying across the yard. We gathered today to witness something unprecedented. A titter ran through the crowd at his choice of words. But then, he continued, warming to his theme. God's love has always been unprecedented. It reaches high and low, encompasses all shapes and sizes, finds beauty in what the world calls different. He looked directly at Mrs. Clearwater's empty chair. Who are we to say what forms love should take? The ceremony proceeded with careful tradition. When it came time for objections, Mira held her breath. The silence stretched, heavy with possibility. Then Cookie's voice boomed out. Anyone objects, they answer to me and my cleaver. Nervous laughter rippled through the gathering. Reverend Morrison looked heavenward as if asking for patience, then continued. The vows came too quickly. Mira had practiced words, but standing there, looking up slightly to meet Bo's eyes, a rare angle for her everything rehearsed fled. Bo, she began, voice catching. They said I was too tall to be loved. You showed me I was exactly tall enough to see over the walls others built, to stand for what's right, to meet you eye to eye as equals. I promise to stand beside you, never behind or ahead, through whatever comes, to build those tall rooms you dreamed of, where we can both live without shrinking. Bo's eyes shimmered. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Mira, you asked me once not to stand behind or in front of you, but beside you as an equal. I promise to honor that, always. To see you not as too much or too little, but as exactly enough. To defend your right to take up space in this world, and to celebrate every inch of the remarkable woman you are. The rings, Reverend Morrison prompted. Tom stepped forward with 2 simple gold bands. As Bo slid the ring onto Mira's finger with his good hand, she heard him whisper, "No more bending, not for anyone. By the power vested in me," Reverend Morrison declared, relief evident in his voice. "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Calder." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Mira leaned down slightly as Bo stretched up, meeting in the middle a perfect compromise, a visual representation of everything they'd promised. The kiss was tender, brief, but it sealed something profound. The yard erupted. Cheers mixed with a few scandalized gasps, but the joy overwhelmed the judgment. As they turned to face their witnesses, Mira saw something unexpected in many faces: respect. Not universal, not complete, but a beginning. The reception unfolded in a blur of congratulations, food, and dancing. The lumbermen took turns spinning Mira around the makeshift dance floor. None of them quite tall enough, but all of them trying. Children begged her to lift them high so they could see over everyone's heads. Even some of the townswomen who'd come reluctantly seemed to soften as the evening wore on. "Look at them." Mrs. Patterson murmured to her husband as Bo and Mira danced. They fit together like puzzle pieces. "Height's just height." Her husband replied, "Love's what makes a marriage." As the moon rose higher, Mira found herself on the porch with Bo, taking a moment of quiet from the celebration. His arm was out of the sling, carefully cradled against his chest. "How's the pain?" she asked. "Worth it. I wasn't missing our wedding for anything." He studied her in the moonlight. "Any regrets?" "Only one." She smiled at his alarmed look. "I wish I'd knocked on your door that first night instead of sleeping on the church porch. Think of all the time we'd wasted." "Not wasted. We needed that time to become who we are now." He gestured to the ongoing party. "Look what you've done. Mira, half this town came to celebrate a marriage they once would have called impossible. You changed minds just by being yourself." "We changed minds," she corrected, "by refusing to be less than we are." "Mrs. Calder," he said experimentally, "it suits you." "Everything suits me now," she said, leaning into his warmth, "because I've stopped trying to suit everyone else." As if summoned by her words, the little girl with the bookmark appeared, tugging at Mira's skirt. Mrs. Mira, will you dance with me?" Mira swept the child up into her arms, carrying her to the dance floor. Other children clamored for their turn, and soon she was surrounded by laughing little ones, all wanting to see the world from her height. "That'll be you someday," Lila murmured to Bo, surrounded by tall babies who inherit their mother's spine and spirit. "God willing," he replied, watching his wife spin and laugh, utterly unself-conscious in her joy. The party continued late into the night, but eventually, the guests departed. Mira and Bo stood in the emptying yard, surrounded by the remnants of celebration. The pine arch still stood, a promise of permanence in its temporary beauty. "Ready to go home?" Bo asked. Home. The small house at the edge of town that came with his new position. They'd spent the last week preparing it, raising door frames, adjusting shelves, making space that fit them both. "I've been ready my whole life," she answered. As they walked through the quiet streets of Timber Hollow, past the shuttered shops and sleeping houses, Mira marveled at how different the world looked. Same buildings, same narrow minds behind some of the windows, but she moved through it transformed, not smaller or diminished, but expanded into her full self. At their door, Bo paused. "There's something I should tell you." "What?" "That first night, when I found you on the church porch, I'd been walking the town for hours, trying to outrun nightmares. Then I saw you there, tall and proud even in defeat, refusing to hide despite everything. And I thought," he touched her face gently, "I thought, there's someone else who knows what it's like to not fit in the space the world allows. And now I think we don't need their space. We've made our own." He opened the door to their homerooms built tall enough for living, not just existing. As Mira stepped inside, she felt the last of her old self fall away. The woman who'd arrived in Timber Hollow broken and rejected was gone. In her place stood Mira Calder seamstress, advocate, wife, a woman who'd learned that love wasn't about making herself smaller, but about finding someone who celebrated her magnitude. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world's whispers and judgments. Inside was warmth, possibility, and space enough for two people who'd chosen to stand tall together. Their story had begun with rejection and the promise of a first night to whoever would defend her. It ended with something better: partnership between equals, love without conditions, and the understanding that some people are meant to take up more space in the world. And that was exactly as it should be. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed following Mira and Bo's journey, please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if this story touched your heart, please consider pressing the hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage, love, and standing tall against all odds in the American frontier.